Welcome to the Web Animation Hootenanny. Please forgive the please forgive the awkward dead silence there. I think we've solved our technical difficulties. I'm Rachel Nabors.
I'm Valhead.
And I'm Brian Birtles.
Welcome to the Hootenanny, Brian. It's good to have you.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
A little introduction text. Brian is one of the authors behind the Web Animation API Spec. Now, the Web Animation API is like this underlying API that's supposed to, one API to rule them all, combine CSS animations and transitions and the SVG Smile specs together so that they all run off the same engine, as it were. This should open it up for developers and designers to reach in and even make tools to fool around with the timing on these objects. It's really cool, and he's come to talk to us today to talk about what contributing to it is like, how it works, what we can expect and look forward to in the future. And we'll be taking your questions too. Please be sure to submit them. Please, Brian, Val, begin.
Yeah, so it's funny because just for everyone who's just joining us, we thought we were on air and we weren't. So this is going to feel a bit like deja vu for us, but that's okay. So Brian, can you tell us a bit about how things got started with, like, how did you get started working on the Web Animations API, and like what prompted you to start this whole specification and get going behind it?
Yeah, so I'm working at Mozilla, working on Firefox, and maybe 10 years ago, actually, I was working on...
It's still an error. An error, you guys.
Oh!
No. A YouTube error. No. I don't know what to do.
Can we do an on-air thing without Crowdcast?
Oh, we can. It's just we're going to lose, like, the whole chat stream.
Oh, true. Yeah, that would be silly.
But, you know, people are looking there. We can just share the link, and they can use the comments, and we can just kind of keep an eye on these questions and make sure we ask them. I'll go. I'm so sorry.
I'm trying to see, does anyone say they see the video? It looks like no one except us.
This is like the first time something has gone so hideously wrong with it. Sorry, hang on there. Yeah, it's like recording that we've been doing them. It's just not, yeah, it's, tell people what it's about. I don't remember anymore. I'm all thrown off my game, you guys.
Oh no. Somewhere
but
like
it says live, so it must be streaming somewhere, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I'm
imagining like somewhere in a Google like user research lab, they're like, let's see what they do next.
Hang on.
Maybe it's like maybe it's a different YouTube link. Maybe.
Oh, hang on. It is. Hang on a second, you
updated.
guys. I can get this.
Oh.
Link to post. Oh my god, this might be it, guys. This might be it. Can that one work?
Waiting for an answer.
Yeah, I'm swapping the video. No YouTube video ID directed in the URL.
Oh.
Hang on,
Hang on.
I can get this. I got this. Watch on YouTube.
Mystery URL problems.
Oh.
Oh, that works. It's saying that it works. Yay!
I'm changing the YouTube URL in the event so that it's updated for everybody too.
Yay!
Save that. Wow, I have no clue like what happened there, but whatever. We're moving on.
Yeah. So.
All right. Hey, everybody. It's okay to see you. Welcome to the Web Animation Hootenanny, rebooted for the second time. I'm Rachel Nabors.
I'm Valhead.
I'm Brian Birtles.
Thank you for coming on the show today, Brian Birtles. Brian is from Mozilla. He works on the Web Animation API. It's this fantastic new animation tool that's been several years in the making. It will unite all the animated things in the DOM, from SVG to DOM elements like divs and things, CSS transitions, animations, and Smile, one spec to rule them all, also allowing us to reach inside with JavaScript and build our own developer tools. Really exciting stuff. Would love to hear more about it. Brian, take it away.
Wow, that intro gets better and better every time.
I know. It's funny, when it's like the third time you've done the intro, it sounds awesome.
I wish I could give every talk like this.
I know. Oh, technical difficulties. But yeah, give us an idea of how you got started in this and why you were interested in, starting this web animations API to begin with.
Yep, so I work on Firefox for Mozilla, and I was doing that about 10 years ago, and specifically I was working on SVG animation features. And at that time, then suddenly CSS animation came along, and it was a completely different model, and that caused some frustration for some people. Everyone agreed that we really should have one model. We shouldn't have these two completely different animation technologies. But no one quite knew how to solve it, or at least no one had the time to try to solve it. And in particular, Microsoft were quite adamant that they weren't going to implement two different animation technologies. They said it's got to be one. And so I put forward a few proposals about how we might solve it, but and everyone said, yeah, that sounds good, but nothing happened until one day Vincent Hardy from Adobe came to me and said, you should just go ahead and do it, and then come back and tell everyone. And so that's kind of how it got started.
And how long ago was that things got started?
That'd be about 4 years ago now. Yeah, it's been a while.
So a long time in internet years, but like in normal life, actually not very long at all. Like that's pretty fast to create any kind of change on this level, I think.
Yeah. I guess, yeah, still not as fast as I'd like, but yeah.
Definitely. So what sorts of, how long did it take browsers to start actually implementing any of this? Like there is a little bit implemented so far, right?
Yeah, so the first pieces started being implemented in Chrome and Firefox about 1.5 years ago, I'd say. Mm-hmm. So that's pretty long lag time, actually. A lot of other specs might start with an implementation and then kind of spec it in parallel or after the fact sometimes. Mm-hmm. But in this case, because we were speccing stuff which is fairly known, we'd already implemented SVG and CSS animations. There wasn't so much learning that we had to do from implementation. So the first bit was just spec work. We needed to make something that...
Yeah.
Yep.
I've heard a couple of things about how the CSS transitions and animations specs sort of magically happened because of the iOS Safari team, and that it wasn't necessarily a spec that was written by committee. It was more of a spec that was railroaded because they really wanted that feature. So tell us a bit, like, when did those come along, and was that difficult to resolve with this existing Smile?
Yeah, in part it was, and yeah, you get different takes on the politics of that process. I guess,
like, some things that seem like they should have the same name have different names.
Yeah, that's really unfortunate. That would have been good to have avoided, but well, it's too late. One thing which a lot of people might not be aware of is that the underlying model is not that different, in that CSS animations and transitions are built for iOS and built on top of core animations. Mm-hmm. And core animations itself is somewhat modeled on Smile. So at the foundation there is actually kind of a common root to the two. The naming's changed and there's a few differences in approach, but it's still a common route to the two technologies, so that's why it was actually possible to align them in web animations.
So even though they appear, in some cases, like the stuff Rachel was mentioning about things called, they should have the same name having different names, they kind of just like branched out from the same source in a way, so you're just kind of like bringing them back together.
Yeah, in a sense. So you see things like animation fill mode, and that's also an SVG fill,
Yeah.
that kind of idea. Yeah, and some of those things, iteration count just equals repeat count, I think it is in SVG. So, you know, the names changed a bit, but the concepts aren't so different there. Yeah.
Do you think there will ever be like a resolution with the naming conventions in the future?
Yeah, I don't know. Actually, that's something we probably will bring up. I'm here in Sydney at the moment for CSS and SVG working group meetings, and yeah, that's one topic which we'd like to bring up tomorrow is in the Web Animations API, we've named things differently yet again. And I want to align them with CSS, but there's been some opposition to doing that. Yeah. So that's something we want to bring up in the meetings tomorrow. And I think one of the proposals was to try to align CSS with Web Animations, but I'm not optimistic about that happening.
So is that kind of... Yeah,
go on.
Is that sort of... Is like something like, hey guys, we should probably name things consistently. I mean, to me that sounds like super logical. But is that something that's easy to get everyone on board for? Or is there like a lot of discussion to agree on like, yes, we should name things the same? Like, how does the process work?
Everyone loves talking about names. That's a well-known thing that once you get talking about names, the discussion just goes on forever. Because, yeah, there's that whole phenomenon where people just pick the easy topics and talk about them forever. Whereas the hard topics, people just glaze over it and say whatever. Yeah, I thought the naming thing would be easy, but the argument against lining it up with CSS is that the names are so long in CSS, and so with
those
SVG,
three-word names.
Right. I like to make fun of that, I have to admit. So they are long.
Yeah.
Animation transition timing function. Wait, animation timing function. Oh god.
Yeah. So that's the thing in the API we call that easing because that's a lot easier to type and a lot more intuitive, I think. But it also means now authors have to remember, okay, when I'm writing script, I write easing, but when I'm writing CSS, I write timing function, and I think probably it's better just to make them the same.
Right.
So that's something yet to be resolved.
I can see how this gets very complicated.
Yeah. So I hope we can align with CSS and not make this problem a bigger problem, but we'll see.
Maybe align them together.
Like a huge group of animation people sitting around a table arguing about naming conventions at this event tomorrow. Are you going to be live tweeting that?
I don't know, because the thing is, it's not that many people are really involved in animation. There'll probably be about half a dozen people who are kind of involved in that. The rest would just be people who are involved in other specs, CSS and SVG specs, and who may or may not have an opinion. But naming something which pretty much everyone has an opinion about. So we'll see.
That sounds like it'll be a fun one. So we've got like 3 questions that people have submitted, so maybe we can go through a couple of those. The first one is, and I haven't read the whole thing yet, so we'll see if I can read it and say it out loud at the same time. Realistically, how long do you think it will take before Web Animation API is fully supported by the majority of browsers? And he adds, I know it's hard to say, but what are your thoughts?
Right. Optimistically, 2 years. So we've got work going on in Chrome and Firefox at the moment, and I'd say for Firefox, rate we're currently going by the end of the year, we should have most of the first level done. There may be a couple of features which are only used in SVG that may be yet to cover. But I'd say most of it should be done by the end of the year, and Chrome is ahead of Firefox, so I'd expect a similar kind of schedule for them. This week I'm talking to someone who might be able to work on it in WebKit, and apparently there was some questions from Microsoft too, so I'm optimistic that they will come on board. So yeah, if things are going well, then I guess 2 years from today, then we'll be pretty close to fully supported in the majority of browsers. But you never know, things come up at the last moment. Someone in one of the companies has a different opinion, and then the whole thing stops or whatever. But
so we shouldn't set we shouldn't set a recurring meeting for 2 years from now to call you up again and talk about how it's all done.
yeah, we can try it.
But actually, your comments about WebKit and Microsoft, is it a definite at this point that all of those major browsers will implement this, or is there still a question that could one of those browsers be like, nah, don't feel like it?
Yeah, it's possible. Absolutely. You can never be sure, but all signs at this stage are positive. Yeah. So I don't anticipate anyone to just flat out say no. More likely it would just be we don't have resources at this time. But if authors really take to it on the other browsers, then that adds pressure.
That's an interesting
to
point, right?
prioritize it.
So the more we use it, the more we'll get, is kind of what you're saying.
Sorry?
The more we use it, the more likely it'll come to being across all browsers.
Right. Right.
There's also a place where you can vote for getting it implemented on Internet Explorer. I'll be sure to tweet the link after the talk.
Yeah.
All 22 of us in the chat can all vote for it.
All 3 of our votes. Person, so that's 66 votes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think one of the other things which is a kind of motivator in both Chrome and Firefox, what we've found is having that API makes it much easier to build animation dev tools. So you'll see some recent tools coming out in both Chrome and Firefox for inspecting and manipulating animations, and that's those tools are really, I expect, going to mature a lot this year. And that's become possible because we're implementing this API. So it's much easier to write those kind of tools. So if the other browsers want to provide the same sort of tools, it makes a lot of sense to implement that API. So that might be another motivator for them. Yep.
That's a good point too. Is those tools wouldn't be possible without it. So that's a pretty good. I don't know. It's a pretty good nudge. Hey guys, don't you want that too?
Yeah.
So you got there's a couple more in the chat. There's one that asks. Does Web Animation API support animating SVG attributes?
Yes, it does. I don't know that anyone's implemented that part yet, but it's Spec anyway. I expect that's probably lower priority in terms of implementing stuff, but yeah, it's in the Spec.
Nice. Yay! Yes. And then the last one in here so far, anyways, unless anyone else wants to contribute some, is that are there equivalents to core animation's model and presentation values in Smile or Web Animation?
I'm not really sure what the question is.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the core Kevin, maybe if you want, Kevin's the one that supported put the question in. If you could explain more what the core animation's model is. I'm not entirely sure what that is either.
Model and presentation. You might be referring to the idea that you have a kind of specified value and then an animated value. So certainly in Smile and SVG, you have that distinction. You have a base value and an animated value. And in CSS, you have the specified style and the computed style, and the computed style is kind of the animated value, amongst other things. So I'm not sure if that's what the question's referring to. So
the answer is kind of maybe right now?
Well, the answer would be in that case that, there is a distinction. So, yeah. I'm not sure if I've answered the question.
It's interesting how, it's like a high-level API thing, and you're like, yeah, this makes total sense, but then you drill down to the details, it suddenly becomes this very, complex thing. So what do you spend, your day-to-day time on when you're working on this? You're a guy that's working on the Web Animations API spec. What do you do kind of on a day-to-day basis to move that forward?
Yeah, so my main job is working on Firefox. So majority of my time is just working on fixing bugs in Firefox, but especially animation bugs, and performance issues, but also implementing this API. And then it's kind of more of my spare time that I work on the spec. But this week I've been doing a lot of work on the spec, and there's a whole bunch of issues in GitHub which you can see. Just trying to knock them off one by one. Currently this week, I've been talking to guys at Google about trying to simplify the API a little bit, because I think there's a few places where we could make it a little easier to use.
Yeah.
And so, that's what I hope to kind of get out of this week, is make it a little simpler, and then hopefully make it a little easier to implement as well.
I guess the easier it is to implement, and the better, right?
Yeah, I mean, we're trying to take the features which aren't really core and defer them to a second stage. Yeah. And that way, stage hopefully, it's stage 2.
That's for the
that way.
release.
Hopefully, we can. Yeah, hopefully we can ship a more solid subset sooner that way.
Yeah.
Rather than having this massive thing which you got to sign up to.
It sounds like you have an awful lot of work to do at Mozilla. Is there anything that the community can do to help with the spec or help with implementation?
I think there's lots of things. One thing is just if people look at the spec and they see things which is obviously not right, then they tell us that that's helpful. We do get that. We've got a mailing list which a few people have posted comments on. That's helpful. But we also have the GitHub repository for the spec, and you can just file issues on that. We do a lot of arguing amongst ourselves about what the best way is to do things, but when we have actual data from developers saying this is no good or whatever, or saying this is a real problem, then that actually makes it a lot easier to come to a conclusion about those issues. So that actually helps a lot. Developers' voice is kind of almost like you can argue with in some regards when it comes to spec discussions.
We'll tweet that link after this too.
Yeah.
To the GitHub repo.
Maybe we can get lots of people to weigh in on the names. You can have some research to draw on tomorrow for your big debate.
I mean, if I could get 20 developers to say line up with CSS names, that's great. Yeah, that's kind of discussions over. So
we might be able to help with that.
Yeah. So that's one thing, just looking at the spec itself, but also anything which kind of indicates interest in that spec, either little projects that use it or blogs that talk about it or whatever, adds pressure to the other vendors to implement it, and that's really helpful.
Speaking of, I have a quick question. There's a polyfill that came out with the Polymer project. The Chrome team made it to help polyfill certain parts of the Web Animation API. Would it be helpful for people to work on experiments using the polyfill, or would you recommend they start with the raw Web Animation API? How in sync are they?
They should be pretty close. There's been a few changes to the spec recently, significant ones, and I expect if my proposal to simplify things goes ahead, then there'll be a few more significant changes in the next week or two. But apart from that, they should be pretty well in sync. The guys who work on it are pretty dedicated and pretty responsive. So you have to be aware that if you work on it, that the API itself may shift a little underneath you. It's still in development. But as long as you're okay with that, then I think, it's helpful for people to start experimenting with it. And I think the guys who work on it do actually try to accommodate those changes by giving warnings and so forth when things are about to change, so that it's not too rough trying to keep up.
Well, hopefully anyone.
It looks like we have another question too, by the way.
I was gonna say, hopefully everyone realizes who's using the API or using the polyfill knows that it's kind of for a moving target, and the whole idea is stuff is changing, which is what kind of makes it so great, really. But anyways. to the question.
So Jonathan Kelly wants to know, does the current Firefox Nightly have the latest web animation spec enabled by default? And I would also add on to that, or is it a partial implementation of the latest spec?
So it's not enabled by default, and there is a partial implementation there, and we have a dashboard which kind of shows you which features are done and which aren't. It's not enabled by default, but it is. You can turn it enabled in the Nightly and the Developer Edition channels. So actually, the question's asking about Nightly. So yeah, if you use Nightly, you'll see the parts of the API that are implemented by default. They get turned off automatically when it reaches beta. So yeah.
And the beta version, what would that? I mean, once it hits that beta, what would that be like? The developer build or Firefox proper?
So there's 4 channels for Firefox. There's Nightly, Developer Edition, Beta, and Release.
Okay.
And it'll be turned on for those first 2, Nightly and Developer Edition. After that, it'll be like it never existed.
Just
disappears. I mean, you can turn it on if you go into the preps, but otherwise it'll be like it's not there.
So if you're using a Nightly or if you're using the Developer Edition, you'll be able to play around with the most current version you have available.
You'll be able to play around with the parts that are implemented, which is a different subset to what's in Chrome. So it might not be the part you're looking for.
So if it's not in the Developer Edition, maybe it's in Canary, or maybe you gotta.
That's right. So in Firefox, we're working on the part to inspect CSS animations, so that part of the API is there to a degree, and in Chrome they're shipping the part for creating animations. So they're different kind of entering the API from opposite ends.
Yeah, and is there a reason you guys have picked different focuses to start out with, or did it just kind of happen that way?
Yeah, I mean for us, we wanted to gradually migrate our animation code over to this API, which means working on exposing existing animations makes more sense. It also helps our testing a lot. We want to be able to use the API for testing, and also to build things like dev tools and so on. And so that means giving access to the CSS animations. As the Blink guys, they basically rewrote their animation engine in terms of web animations and dropped it in wholesale. So they took quite a different approach. And I think they wanted to expose the ability to create compositor animations through script. So that's why they were keen to be able to create animations using the API. But they will converge.
Yeah, they'll meet in the middle somewhere.
It's basically 2 ends of the bridge coming together.
I'm curious if you have any sort of automated testing, like visual testing, like when you've implemented something like, we've ported all these animation features, so they're now using the API, and we've got to go test to make sure that, all of the things are animating as they should over the times that they should. Do you have some sort of automated testing framework for that, or do you have to go in and eyeball everything?
No, it's all automated because, we...
How are you doing that?
So there's different techniques. For SVG, you've got set current time. So basically, we just pause the animation, then we set current time, and then we just either use JavaScript to query what the animated values are, or we use ref tests, which basically take a snapshot of the page and compare it against another image. For CSS, that's not as easy. We sometimes use like a negative delay and to kind of seek to a certain part of the animation and take a snapshot then. Or sometimes we use special testing only APIs to manipulate the timeline. In future, we hope to drop the reliance on those test only APIs and use Web Animations API to basically seek animation to the point we want to test and that sort of thing.
Awesome.
Yeah. Sounds like quite the complex testing setup, but it's good. A lot more detail goes into this than I think a lot of people think. It's not like you're just like, it should do this, yay.
Yeah. I mean, I guess like we talked about before, when we weren't being broadcast,
the secret part.
It takes a long time to put features into browsers. There's a lot of reasons why it's slow to add things to browsers, and that's why we really want to expose this API so that people don't have to wait for new features, but they can build them themselves from the pieces.
Did you explain that bit in the recorded part of why it's like an API and not something trying to change all the things for browsers? I don't think we did.
Did that get recorded?
I don't think it did. I think you should
just restate it. There's some late joiners. Go for it, man.
It's a really, really good point. So, yeah, say it again.
All day.
So I think the point I wanted to make when we talk about that is for the casual web developer, it's not always obvious that there's been this shift that's taken place recently in the way we do new browser features. And that is, we used to do all these amazing features with all the bells and whistles and ship them as they are. And that was great, like we'd add CSS animations or whatever, or filter effects or whatever. But it takes such a long time to implement those things. We've got to get all the browser vendors to agree on something. We've got to spec it thoroughly. We've got to have a test suite. We've got to make sure it's secure. We've got to make sure it's absolutely rock solid. And then we've got to ship it, which takes several months to get to the release channel. And that's just really slow. And the web's moving a lot faster than that. So there's this a movement that came about a few years ago called the Extensible Web. And the whole idea with that movement is that instead of browsers shipping these fully formed features, they should focus on exposing the building blocks behind them, these kind of primitives that make up the features. And then once those primitives are available, web developers can build up their own new features based on those primitives. And so that's how web animations works. Rather than piling up a whole lot of new animation features, initially what we want to do is just expose the building blocks behind animation and then let script libraries and so on build up new things from those building blocks. So yeah, that's kind of, it's sometimes talked about as explaining the platform rather than having so much magic in the web, just to peel back the layers and see what the pieces are that are being used to make all those features.
Definitely sounds like something that moves forward much faster, which, like you said, is why you did it. Does it kind of change the relationship between people like making these libraries and you guys as the people writing the spec, as it like before this kind of idea was in place?
Yeah, it does. So I think the idea now is that once you have all these building blocks available, we just kind of sit back and see what library authors build with them. And if there's some patterns which are really common and which would have advantages to being done in the browser. For example, maybe if we do them in the browser, we could make them a little faster, or we could make them more secure. Then we'll go and basically spec what's in script libraries. So even things like promises, which everyone who writes JavaScript will be familiar with, that was originally something that was just a JavaScript library function. But now that's natively implemented in browsers. And so it's sometimes referred to as like paving the cow paths, that we just wait and see what people build from these things, and then we can bake them into the browser if there's advantages to doing that.
It sounds like a much better process for spending time on the things people actually want and need, that kind of iterative process. So instead of spending all this time building something no one cares about, at least there's interest.
Right.
That's good.
Yeah, so there was an exciting meeting over the weekend, which I wasn't part of, but it's called the Houdini project. And it's basically trying to explain the magic behind CSS. And a group of people got together here in Sydney and basically to find all these new building blocks which need to be exposed so that people can develop their own CSS features in JavaScript without having to wait for browser vendors to implement them.
That sounds pretty darn cool. Like,
Yeah.
what can we make?
Yeah, that's right.
We have one more question,
Oh, good.
and I think we've got just enough time to answer it.
Yeah.
Peter asks, what is the best place to get started looking into the Web Animations API? Do you have any links to simple demos?
I like this question. Good question, Peter.
I think Rachel might be the best one to answer that. Yeah, from the little I can think of, the Polyfill is a good place to get started. It has a bit of a getting started guide along with it, and I think a lot of people learn by doing. So if that's your style, then that might be one of the best places to get started. Yeah, that's probably the first thing that comes to mind for me, but I guess you guys have a lot more links up your sleeves.
I actually don't. People haven't been using the Web Animation API very much, like aside from the Polyfill page with all its examples. I made one example for the article I wrote, State of the Animation on smashing, but I've been meaning to make more. I just haven't had the time.
And I feel like I've seen, but it might just be the polyfill examples. There was a snowing one that I thought was maybe not a polyfill example, but I think it might actually have been. And that's how I remember the internet. It was snowing. That's all I've got.
So obviously the world needs more.
Yes.
Yeah, I think there may be one on HTML5 Rocks. I think when Chrome first shipped element.animate, I think they also did a post on HTML5 Rocks. So that's probably helpful as well as a gentle introduction. Yeah, although there is one or two things that have changed since that, but yeah, it's mostly accurate.
I think, yeah, the HTML5 Rocks, I just looked it up. That's the one with the snow example. So there you go. That was the one I was thinking. Yeah. See, that's the only way I remember things. Like, what was animating in it? Okay, cool, snow, got it. No idea where I got it from, but that's it.
I did a video demo a couple of years ago, but the API has changed since then, so I wouldn't want to recommend that.
Is that part of, is that part of you guys writing the spec and putting it together at all, is putting out these demos, or is that more something you're relying on the community for? Yeah,
that's certainly something I'd like to rely on other people for. I think the Chrome team at least has a big DevRel team, so they can, to an extent, get those guys to write up stuff. And we have a couple of guys at Mozilla who will document stuff on MDN and that sort of thing. But it's still obviously really helpful for people beyond us to write those things. And also they'll often dig up things or expose weaknesses in their spec that we otherwise mightn't have found. So it also provides really useful feedback.
That's great. So everyone in the chats and watching totally should go make some demos to help Brian out. That's our job for the rest of this week. Vote on naming.
Awesome.
What is the thing you need for tomorrow? We need people to say that they want to match names to CSS.
Yes, that'll be good.
So tell Brian you'd want to match names to CSS and go make some demos. Been a productive chat.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah, and I think, if there's anything you want help from the community on more specifically, like if you want help on naming stuff, let us know and we can totally tell people on Twitter and help get you at least some help over Twitters, if nothing else.
That'd be good. Yeah, I need to do it more.
Oh, well, I think we're pretty much out of time. You were exactly right on timing, Rachel.
I tried my best. So there are a bunch of links. There are like at least 4 or 5 different links that totally belong with today's discussion.
We're making notes.
Yes. So they're going to be tweeted, and so everybody just keep an eye peeled on Val and my accounts, and we will hook you up with that in just a few minutes after the recording.
Yeah. And thanks everyone for joining us, and especially to Brian for answering all of our questions and being on our awesome Hootenanny.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
It's been a pleasure, Brian. Thank you for coming.
Yay.
And my pleasure.
All right, everybody. Thanks for coming. And